This is Cybersound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to Cybersound. I'm your host, Jason Pufall, joined today, as recently, by Michael Grandi, our CEO, Rob McWilliams today, a data privacy consultant we've worked together now for the better part of 4 years. Rob, so it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you, Jason.
And Brian Brehart, who is one of Vancord's information security officers on our VISO team. So Brian, thanks for joining.
Anytime.
So we've had now some good banter around this for a half hour as we sort of prepared for this, but we're going to talk a little bit today about the data leak. I've seen it called the breach. I've seen it called the leak, but we'll stay with leak today. 23andMe had initially reported roughly 14,000 user records were accessed. As a little bit more data came to light, I think that bumped up to approximately somewhere between 6 and 7 million. And the initial reports really were the 14,000 were a result of password reuse. So essentially, users that had used a password on another site, subsequently used it then on the 23andMe site. They contend that the passwords were compromised somewhere else, and they were basically password stuffed or reused to try to access data in 23andMe. And I think they've actually filed sort of a formal response via a legal formal response that says it's not really our fault. Users should have taken more responsibility to protect their credentials, and it's a shame that the data was accessed, but a significant responsibility lies with the user. I think that's what we really should spend some time exploring today, because it's maybe it's an atypical response for these types of things. So I'm going to throw that out there, and I'm wondering, anybody have a thought or a comment to start with?
Yeah, actually I do. So this is something that in my career as a security professional, we've debated in roundtable discussions, we debated in on-premise, sitting in the office, gone to, all the things that security professionals go talk about things. And it's kind of this idea that the users are going to one day just understand how serious this is and take it into their own hands to make sure that their passwords are long and complex, and they use password managers. And the reality is they're not going to do this. So we as security professionals need to acknowledge the reality and do everything we can, especially with a company like 23andMe, where whether it's right or wrong, the data they collect, people are terrified of that getting out. Right. And so, at least from a marketing perspective, they need to make sure they can't just comply. They need to go above and beyond and understand that we can't rely on users. We just and it's not their job. It's not users' job. So we have to do ours.
Yeah.
So that's mine in a nutshell.
And go ahead, Rob. I think there are two ways of looking at this. One is the common sense approach, and one is the legal approach, and they're not always the same thing. You've articulated the common sense approach, I think, Brian, and most reasonable people would agree with you. The interesting thing is I think that the legal situation probably coincides with in this case, with the common sense approach. This is undoubtedly data that is regulated by privacy laws, whether in the United States or overseas, Europe, GDPR, places and regulations like that. As you point out, it's sensitive data. It's information about your ancestry, who you are related to, where you come from. This is not inconsequential data. And under those privacy laws, companies have a general obligation to maintain reasonable security standards. Now, you can point perhaps and say to a user in your terms of use, you have to maintain a high quality password or whatever. But even if that is true and acceptable, one thing in this case, if I've understood it correctly, that kind of nullifies that, is that one user's bad password gave access to other users' data.
Yeah.
So I could have a Fort Knox password on my account, but it doesn't protect my data because 23andMe has this function that allows you to share information.
Yeah, the relative sharing feature, right? Don't they call that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something they've developed as part of their commercial service. And so I'm with you, and I think the law is with you that 23andMe cannot just point at the users and say, you haven't maintained a strong enough password.
Yeah, and my point was sort of analogous to that, which was there's an implicit expectation of additional security protocols and standards when, some cases collecting DNA information, very personal, really to a certain extent. There's an unknown, future for what that data and where that data can go and what it can be used for in many cases. And I think that there's a sort of a fad. I'll just say it's a trendy thing, right? Ancestry.com, 23andMe, let's expand and see how far, our connections go in family members and in our, sort of our heredity. And let's learn more, which is great. Information is great. But I think Brian very clearly put, the expectation of privacy and protection is there. And just because there's some small print that says the obligation is with the user, the standards need to be higher. And the expectation that the clients use, just 14,000 turning into 6.9 million simply because of this feature that expands. They've only got 14 million accounts, and that's not a small number, but that's an incredible.
But it's half their user base.
That's half of their user base, and I think that's, it's really scary as a consumer. I'd be really concerned about what this means and what their internal protocols in their systems are. If their first reaction is, it's not our fault. You clients, your accounts were lazily set up or protected. It's on you.
And I think that's, I think that point that Rob made, which is the decision or the choice by a small percentage of users had a great impact on 50% of users, right? So I think 23andMe said that they did not require multi-factor, but they had offered it as an option and people didn't avail themselves to it. I think you have to enforce things like that, right? Because you can't really permit somebody's bad choice to have that kind of an impact on the broader population. And I think that's really one of the egregious things here.
Yeah, that's to and I'm glad, Jez, you made that point, is that they made it an option. And, I have to be, the way I've always looked at, like, when you write policies, when you write processes, when you put together these things, I always look at security like raising children. That because they don't know, and that's the thing, users don't have to know. We would like them to. Sure. We put out awareness training, every tech magazine, every social media has, hey, ways to protect your password, ways to protect your account. But at the end of the day, they don't read them. If you've ever been on social media, there's people still kind of proud that they don't know how to set up the clock on a VCR.
Right.
And it's like, okay, we're in a technological age, and but that's the thing, is you have to accept that this is what's going to happen. So you have to do things, like, you have to force it. And if users complain, fine. And that's why you have support teams that will help take them through the process. You also have marketing things to explain, hey, this is to protect your info. We're doing this for you. And you just take the hit. And, and so that's the thing, is that it's better. Think of it this way. It's better to have to take an irate user support call, I don't know how to create my password, than have to go through this media blitz about, you lost all these people's information and now you got to backtrack and you've got to, do some duck and cover. I don't know. I'd rather have just my help desk help someone than have to do this. So
Well, and the companies know. So the users may not recognize the risk of password reuse, but the companies understand it. I know that when I do security awareness training and I ask people to raise their hand if they have a unique password for every website or company they interact with, and 0 hands go up, every single time I ask the question, I know. So 23andMe, I think, had a responsibility to recognize that and better protect those accounts. And I think that's the problem.
I absolutely agree. I mean, other companies that are arguably handling less sensitive personal data do force a certain standard of password, and do force regular resets, and sometimes enforce some level of two-factor authentication. So why a company handling this sort of data didn't, I think, is a very valid question. I think the other thing I noticed in one of 23andMe's responses or outputs was that no harm was going to result from this breach. And they said, this is not data that's going to lead to you losing money. It doesn't involve it's not going to lead to identity theft or whatever. That may be true, but it's a rather old-fashioned view, I think, of how personal data can be misused. Yeah, you're probably not going to have your bank account drained because of this breach, but revealing your relationships and your ancestry can cause harms. That's documented. There are loads of stories about people finding out that they're not related to who they thought they were related to, and related to people they didn't think they were related to.
Harm is relative, to sort of keep up the trend.
So this is sensitive data, and it does look to me like they have serious questions to answer about whether they've protected it adequately.
And to your point, Rob, this time.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, and at this moment, that's the one thing about security that we know is that we have to still monitor and maintain, because we don't know what there could be another way this could be used. And so that we haven't thought of, or, that we'll say the attacker hasn't tried yet. And, that's the first rule of security. It's not if, but when.
Yeah.
So and I think we all see, the attackers are really creative in how they use this data. Like the ransomware is something that, frankly, I didn't conceive of 10 years ago. Somebody did, and here we are, right? So somebody will think about some creative way to utilize this data. I mean, they're trying to charge, or they're offering the opportunity to this impacted population to pay between $1 and $10 to have their data expunged. Like, all right, that's your sort of standard. How do I make money off of this? But the data has other uses for sure.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think we're kind of coming to an end. One thing I wanted to ask was, Brian, do you actually know how to set the time on a VCR? Because I don't know that. I don't know that anybody knows how to do that.
Well, and to that point, I wonder what we as security professionals. I mean, I know we all. If you're working individual, everybody gets awareness training, or at least they should, right? But what about the people who aren't? How do we, the article mentioned the laundry list of ways people can protect their passwords, and I went to the dark reading article it referenced. There's 2. Use long and complex, and use a password manager. Right. To me, that's not a laundry list. And now, I use a password manager, but I'm a security professional. How do we teach people to use? Because that is, to me, if not the most effective, one of the most effective ways of combating this problem, because you don't have to remember it. They're portable, right? But I try to get my family and friends to use it, and they're like, it's just too complex. I don't get how this works.
And that's the crazy part, because they make creating a password easier. They make accessing a password easier. Like, honestly, I think it's a world of convenience.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
There's an adoption sort of hindrance here. It feels so onerous. Well, it's going to take me so long to figure out how many passwords I have and ultimately get to those sites. But once you start, your natural progression of visiting different websites, accessing different applications, just automatically takes over, makes the process so much easier. Right. Yeah.
I think your point, Brian, is a very good one, that this is a consumer-oriented organization. So the people who are using it are not getting nagged by their company to create a certain kind of password or forced to change it. These are just, folk who may not be getting this advice.
Right. And in fact, probably aren't.
Probably
right?
are
Yeah,
not.
most of them.
Sounds like another CyberSound episode, right? How to use your password manager, and we can
do some how-tos.
Yeah. Do we have a recommendation? Are we allowed to have recommendations?
We're not sponsored by anybody, so we can say anything we want.
Because I've used a bunch. 1Password is the one I use, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, but LastPass has had its share of documented issues, and frankly, I know a lot of people who still have confidence in that tool. Right? Their credentials weren't accessed in spite of the problems that they had. And Bitwarden is probably another one that's gotten a little bit more popular. I think partly because there's a really kind of pretty robust free option there.
Yeah. And
I have a little green Post-it note on my laptop.
As many Post-its.
Password 1, password 2, and my really good one, pass 1. No one's going to guess that.
Yeah, if you substitute a 0 for the O, right? All right, so obviously those are all things not to do. That's the laundry list of bad examples.
Do not do's.
Right.
Like I said, that's another episode. It
is indeed. Actually, it's not. That's a good idea, Brian. I think we probably should do that. We tend to be a little bit more strategic, but I think you're right. People probably need the simple, how do I actually protect myself against it? Because it's like the keys to your house, right? There's nothing more important than protecting those. You want to protect your digital credentials as well.
Right.
So,
sir.
Guys, thanks for joining. I think this is an interesting topic, honestly, and I'll be really curious to watch where any of sort of this legal response goes, because it's one I wouldn't have. It's a position I wouldn't have expected them to take. I'm kind of hopeful they might back off of it, but if not, then we get to see.
The more entrenched they become, maybe the more ridicule they're subject to, of course.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So if anybody has info on this, that maybe we didn't touch on and wants to drop us a note, feel free to comment, certainly in YouTube or any of the common places. I've been told now that we need to tell people to like or to comment in some way, because that actually helps a lot with people.
Like and share.
What'd you say, Brian? Mash that like button?
Smash that like button.
Right. So that's what we're going to ask people to do. We have our producer is cringing. I think I'm not sure he loves that so much. And as always, though, we appreciate people listening. We hope you got some value out of this. Rob and Brian in particular, thanks for joining today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, gentlemen.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.